Hello and welcome to the Mississippi Valley Archaeology Center's UWL Archaeology Alumni Podcast. I'm MVAC archaeologist Cindy Kutchik. Through this podcast series, we are connecting with alumni from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse Archaeology program, finding out what they did after graduation, perhaps if they stayed in archaeology, where else did life lead them? So we're hoping to hear some interesting stories and perspectives as we explore what those UWL archaeology alumni have done. Today, our guest is well known to MVAC and worked for us for a while, Max Pschorr. Max attended UWL from 2008 to 2013, graduated in May of 2013 with a BA in archaeology and also majored in French language. He later went on to earn a Master of Science in Geographic Information Science at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Graduated from there in 2018 and has been living in Massachusetts since he started the grad program there in 2016. He worked as a student intern at MVAC and then later as a field and laboratory technician at MVAC after graduating. Max also recently married his partner Connor last October, so congratulations on that as well. Lots of exciting things going on. So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here. Obviously loved my time at UWL and loved my time with MVAC. So really excited to get to share some of those memories and just kind of tell you a little bit about what life's been like so far. So yeah, happy to be here.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you joining us today. So to start off, what drew you to UWL's archaeology program and influenced that decision? So we're deciding where to go to college. What stood out about UWL?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in high school, I took a lot of language classes in French and in Latin. And a lot of the time, the things that were most interesting to me in those courses were history. So when it was time for me to go to college, I was looking at different Wisconsin system schools. Archaeology program stood out at La Crosse. Also, just the setting of La Crosse on the between the bluffs and the river seemed really great. So I applied there, decided to pursue a major in the archaeology program as a way to kind of explore my interest in history and social sciences. And then also kind of recognizing that after one graduates from college, one does need to get a job. And in archaeology, there are jobs. So that was something that was really attractive to me about that discipline in particular and that degree in particular. So yeah, so kind of my love for history and my love for social sciences, and then my desire to be employed after I graduated.
Yeah, that always comes to mind as you're sort of sifting through all the options and figuring out what to do. And I know I just mentioned that you majored in French language as well. Did that play into what you wanted to eventually study in archaeology or why you came to La Crosse?
Interestingly, not really. So French is just my family's always studied it. My grandparents or my on my mom's side and my siblings, it's always just been an interest of mine. And so I've never really did anything in archaeology with French. I think I translated one historical document or part of a historical document to help out a buddy who is writing his master's thesis in archaeology. There was just like a section he was using that historical document as a reference to explain some things that they saw in their in the context of their archaeological site. So I guess I did do that. Not really relevant, but yeah. So I never really did anything with French and archaeology together. But still was a good program and something that's I think has made my life a lot richer for having taken those courses and eventually getting that degree.
It definitely makes you switch your brain a little bit when you're operating in a foreign language and
Right,
think a little
right.
differently. So while you were studying at UWL, did you take the UWL field school that's held locally in La Crosse every year?
Yeah, so the year that I did field school, I think was Professor Dave Anderson's first or maybe second field school with the UWL. It was an early field school. I know he's taught it for several years since then. So I took the field school in 2010, I think. And that was good. We were not out at the Tremaine site quite yet, so we were in a couple different locations, but that was a great experience. Just that whole summer, getting to know people, the friends that I made through that, lifelong friends, still friends with a bunch of people that I took that I was in field school with, and then just the field methods it's were an excellent thing to pick up, really important for coursework in the later part of the degree, and then obviously contributed greatly to the work that I did at MVAC. I will say I also ended up TAing the field school in 2012, I think it was. So yeah, so I came back, worked with Dave again. At that point, he had the field school was over at the Tremaine site. So just being able to come back as a teaching assistant, kind of help share some of those skills and techniques for doing those like phase 3 level excavations was also incredible. Again, still friends with a bunch of people from that field school. Some of my closest friends that came to my wedding back in October were people that I met mostly through being the teaching assistant through the field school. So yeah, field school was for sure a highlight, both as an attendee and a teaching assistant of my time at UWL.
And that's a great opportunity to be able to supervise people in the field and be able to bring that experience eventually when you're looking for a job.
Yeah,
That can be really important. And mentioning phase threes, at least in Wisconsin here, that's sort of like in-depth excavation or stripping of the topsoil to perform like a very full-fledged excavation looking for features in the ground. So it's kind of a very
yeah.
high level.
And I guess in the case of field school, it wasn't really for cultural resource management purposes, right? It's for research and academia. So maybe I misspoke a little bit, but yeah, point being an excavation of a site and not just survey work.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So while you were a student, got that experience in the field, um, what were you able to do at MVAC then? You had a research internship, and did some other things. So what did that all entail?
Yeah, MVAC that was really the sort of crown jewel of my time in La Crosse. Being able to work and make a living doing archaeology work was excellent as a first job in sort of my career. It was a great place to step into a professional work environment, kind of learn how to work with others, learn what it means to like have that type of job that's not just not knocking anything, but like up until that point, I'd worked at a movie theater and a fast food restaurant, right? So like starting to like make the move into more of like knowledge work. It's really interesting to kind of get a handle of what that meant. The work itself at MVAC was, incredible. A lot of survey work, but then also there were a few large projects at the time that were like we were talking about earlier, phase 3 projects. So just to get the chance to work on those projects was, I don't think every archaeology that works in cultural resource management necessarily gets the chance to work on as many of those things in the short period that I was with MVAC. So it was pretty incredible. And yeah. Um, and then also just like the diversity of things that I got to work on. So obviously field work, survey work, and then just the opportunities we had in the lab. So to actually do some of the analysis on things we brought back in the lab, I also worked on some historic historic archaeological projects that had been excavated years prior to me joining the MVAC team. And then even things as sort of high level as like database design and like reference library cataloging and things like that. So there were a number of different experiences that really allowed me to hone different types of skills and get practiced on a lot of different areas.
In your research internships, you gained experience through that. Were self-directed with a supervisor, or how did that work with MVAC and figuring out what the goals for the internship were and how you and MVAC were going to work together on that?
Yeah, so I never really did like I guess what you would think of as like traditional research. Most of the work that I did with MVAC was project based. I know, I mean, some of the things we did, obviously, it being an academic or a set in a setting of an academic institution, some of the things were sort of research like. I got a chance to help out on some of the like faunal collection or faunal reference collection work that was being done at the time. I know Jim Thieler and Mitch Running and Kathy Stevenson at the time were kind of leading that and really doing the most of the work. But there were some opportunities for me to kind of help out there and help them as they were kind of expanding what that reference collection would look like. I know that was sort of one of the outstanding things at MVAC is they're your enormous faunal reference collection. So yeah, but otherwise I don't think I ever really did any like more traditional research projects with MVAC. It was mostly contract focused.
And it wasn't like an internship as part of a course in your study at UWL. This was like employment
Yeah,
after
yeah.
you were done. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess technically the title might have been like internship, but in my last year at UWL, I was a part-time student or virtually part-time. And so when I was working, I was mostly working on like contract projects at that point. Although there were a number of other students that did do more research type things in the few years that I was with MVAC. So that's definitely something people did. I just didn't happen to.
Great. And one of the big things about UWL's archaeology program is that it sort of caps off with a thesis, a piece of original research that you're working with advisors and faculty on, and doing original research yourself under that supervision. So what did you do for your senior thesis? And did you make any connections with people at other institutions through that, or sort of deeply dive into something that you kept up with or were really interested in?
So I don't think I really did anything after my senior thesis with that particular subject. It was the my senior thesis project was a comparison of two ceramic assemblages from two different sites in Syria and the Hellenistic period. And basically, I was trying to look at if we could tell any differences about those two sites based on their ceramic assemblages by comparing like one like sort of core site, like a larger city site versus what was categorized as more of like an outpost. And kind of midway through or in the latter part of my thesis, I realized I was probably comparing more about contexts between like a domestic setting and like a military setting than I was like a core and a periphery setting. So I don't know. My thesis was good. It was a good exercise in like research methods and a good exercise in statistics and like putting all those things together and like going through research materials. But I wouldn't say my senior thesis was really groundbreaking or anything like that in terms of what it told us about about Hellenistic society in Syria. So yeah, so it was good. I enjoyed it. The class and the exercise was good. But yeah, no major research findings there. And I haven't done anything with it since then. So
And in addition to that, speaking of connections, like were there any um, outside sources you worked with, or like professors at different universities or anything like that, whose work
um,
you're looking at?
yeah, not really. So it's, I mean, obviously there were professors that were working on that, right? That like led the excavations and um, led the reports and you know, the whole project. Uh, I really just you know, used the site reports and then what had been written about the assemblages that had been collected up until that point. Yeah, so it didn't work directly with any of the researchers. I know that's definitely something that some students do. I remember there were a number of quite remarkable theses, I guess, in the years prior to, and then my year. I mean, I think some of those folks did end up working with the institutions or professors of the sites or assemblages that they were looking at. Um, but yeah, not for my project.
Yeah. Yeah, and Syria and Greece, and sometimes all the actual artifacts and researchers are very far away in some place you can't easily get to too. So
Yeah.
so following your thesis, graduating, um, what did you do just after graduating, and how did it eventually lead you into grad school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, at when I finished my degree, I had been working with MVAC already, and they had a need for field and tech or tech and lab technicians or field and lab techs. Um, so that was an easy fit for me to continue that work to try to get more experience in archaeology to stay on at MVAC. So I stuck around with MVAC for 4 years, I guess in total, um, and really got to know a lot about what archaeology is in Wisconsin and what cultural resource management is. Um, so a lot of survey work for transmission lines, for trout habitat rehabilitation projects, for sand mines, for road construction, hospitals, uh, state armories for the state of Wisconsin, or National Guard armories for the state of Wisconsin, tons of projects like that, right? Farmland improvement projects through the NRCS. So, you know, over those 4 years, I worked on a lot of different projects, got exposed to a lot of different things. One of the most interesting things for me was, I mean, obviously the archaeology was great when we found things. A lot of times it's just survey work and you don't find any necessarily archaeological remains. But one of the really interesting things for me was just learning about what those projects were. Like, how did they work? What was their intention behind them? What you know, what agencies are responsible for governing them? A lot of times there were politics behind what was going on. So sometimes when you're working on a project like that, it can be quite sensitive, and you have to kind of learn, all right, how do I do my job? How do I engage with my project and potentially people that I might see while I'm doing my project in a setting that can be really, you know, that can be kind of tense, right? Especially for large construction projects. If people businesses are impacted, emotions can be pretty high. So that was always really interesting to kind of see how that worked, and what those projects were like. One particular project, there was like a large wind farm that was going in. Obviously, you can imagine, it's a little bit controversial of the subject. So just kind of seeing the different perspectives, what goes into how you handle that delicate situation. Um, yeah, uh, I would say generally, it also really taught me a lot about how public projects work and how you know, agencies manage different public initiatives. So I thought that was really interesting. It's not something that I had a lot of experience with. Um, Yeah. Does that answer your question? I feel like I got off track a little bit there, but who knows?
Oh yeah, with all that variety of experience and working with different stakeholders on projects, how did that eventually lead you into graduate school and studying geographic information science?
Yeah. So I did take one GIS class when I was a student at UWL. And then we use GIS at MVAC, or you guys use GIS at MVAC in a few different ways. Um, while I was there, there's three kind of main things that I can think of. So the first is planning projects ahead of time. So whether that's reviewing historical maps in context in like a GIS system in context to kind of like place where historical structures might have been, where different land features might have been. And then also planning out survey work. So identifying, all right, here's the actual area, like having a GIS file that represents the work site in polygon form. So you can actually overlay on the map and say, okay, this is where we need to test. Coming up with a plan of attack. So before you even go out into the field to decide, all right, I know we have this many acres to cover. This is kind of the layout. We have access roads in certain areas. How many days do we think this is going to take? How many crew will we need? Um, so there's like the GIS of kind of the pre-project work that you would want to do. And then there's, I guess, GIS in the field. So collecting any information, we take lots of waypoints for where different shovel test probes are dug in phase one, or like the really cursory like survey work, or where test units were dug in phase two archaeology, where you're actually trying to determine whether or not a site needs to be looked at closer, or more work needs to be done in a particular site once it's identified. um so there's that, recording where all those things take place. And then the last piece is putting together maps for presentation, whether that's presentation in like in to an audience, so to speak, or whether it's in a report. So as MVAC is a cultural resource management firm, all of the contract work they do eventually has to be written up into a report and submitted to agencies for approval to show that the appropriate work was done. And maps are a huge part of that, right? You have to be able to show in a map, like, yes, this is the site. Yes, we were in the right place. And yes, we tested what we were supposed to test. So my exposure to GIS from MVAC was through kind of those different mechanisms. And so I kind of started to get some experience from a skills perspective, a little bit better understanding from just a technique and a technique perspective. Um, and then, yeah, so for grad school, how I ended up at Clark, my undergraduate research or advisor at the time was Dr. Christine Hippert, who was a professor of anthropology at the time in the archaeology department. And she and I looked at a few different schools and programs together. And she actually ended up suggesting Clark to me. She was an alumna of Clark. That was where she went for undergrad. And at the time, I had an interest in international development through the courses I took in the anthropology department at UWL. And then they happened to have a GIS program that is in the international development department at Clark. So I applied, thinking that it could be good from an area of interest perspective, and that I could get some experience with international development. And then from like a tools and skills perspective, I could get a degree in GIS that could open up a lot of different windows for me from a career perspective. So if I wanted to pivot and go back into archaeology, do a lot of the things that I was doing at MVAC before, but maybe at a higher level, like a little bit more in the spatial analysis side, a little bit more in like the systems design, or tooling, I could go back into archaeology. Or if I wanted to pursue a different path outside of archaeology, I would now have this really strong, this really robust tool set in GIS that would allow me to pursue that. And ultimately that second path is what I've been pursuing for the last 5 or 6 years or so at this point since graduating in 2018.
Great. And what sort of things do you do with GIS now? Sort of what's kind of the ordinary day, or kind of an example of what you do in your current position?
Yeah. So I'm currently a geographic, I guess, software engineer. So I build tools and systems using software engineering and then GIS tools that are all geographic in nature, or primarily geographic in nature. I will say on a day-to-day basis, much like at MVAC, where we had to work on a lot of different things all at the same time, you might switch from different projects over the course of the day or between days. It's much the same now with my position. I mean, I am a software engineer, but a lot of what I do isn't necessarily just like writing code or like doing GIS work. Um, so yeah, mostly just developing systems, trying to automate tools, working on spatial data products, things like that. Not very relevant to archaeology anymore, but I definitely use a lot of the skills and ways of thinking that I learned at UWL through courses like research methods, theory courses, and then some of the technical skills that I learned from being a lab tech at MVAC. So like attention to detail, being able to like catalog things while thinking about complex problems and trying to like reduce them to component parts. So a lot of those skill sets, while they're not specifically archaeology or anthropology anymore, they're still relevant to the work that I'm doing as a software engineer.
Now, getting beyond work a little bit, is there anything you still do with archaeology more recreationally, or do you keep up with articles? I'm sure Massachusetts, it's quite a bit different from Wisconsin in terms of both history and archaeology, and kind of like things you can explore, like have a free weekend. You could, maybe go to Boston, or like so many different things that you can do that tie back into archaeology.
Yeah, so I would say, getting the degree at UWL, I may have said this earlier about my French degree, but I'll say it about archaeology too. It wasn't only about being able to be employable after I graduated. A lot of getting that degree was about making my life richer. And I think just having that archaeological lens and like being able to think about things from the perspective of an archaeologist has really helped me be able to appreciate a lot of the things that I interact with. Obviously, New England, in terms of like Euro American history, is a lot older than Wisconsin. In terms of the history of North America, all of like proto history and prehistory, Native American history, like that's obviously everything in New England is really young in comparison. But there are still lots more historical structures here. Interestingly, there's not as much above ground prehistoric Native American remains that can be seen in New England because Wisconsin and the upper Midwest have effigy mounds and conical mounds. I've always felt like Native American history is a lot more present and accessible in the upper Midwest than it is in New England. Might also just be I don't know where to look, but who knows. Um, but yeah, so I'd say in seeing different historical things, I'm able to like understand things a little bit differently because of my degree. One thing that me and my husband really enjoy is travel. And so anywhere that we go, obviously my eye is always on, all right, what archaeological or historical thing is should we be visiting when we go to this place. So we've had a chance to see some really cool archaeological things together in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, back in Wisconsin or Iowa, places like Effigy Mounds National Monument, or across the river at Wyalusing State Park. um,
Where
so
has some of your international travel taken you?
um, uh, a few different places. Probably one of the biggest ones from an archaeological perspective that was really incredible is in central Mexico around Mexico City. So Teotihuacan is obviously the ruins of Teotihuacan are outside Mexico City. So that was like pretty incredible to be able to visit that. And then I think probably my favorite museum I've ever been to anywhere is the National Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. One of the things I find, obviously their collections are incredible, but one of the things that I find really, really astounding about that is so many of the world's like top museums are populated by a lot of artifacts that were essentially like taken by Europeans from the areas that they colonized.
Mm.
And with the National Anthropological Museum in Mexico, you have Olmec, you have Aztec, you have Maya, you have all these different indigenous groups from Mexico that are represented at this like world-class, incredible museum. And it's all from groups that lived, there or nearby, or like, mostly within Mexico. So that seeing that museum there is just, yeah, it was really cool. So that was definitely a highlight for me. And I like to think that because of my background, because of my degree and exposure to anthropology and archaeology, I'm able to kind of share a little bit of a different lens, um, both with myself and then the people that I get to visit those places with. So that being said, I never did take Timothy McAndrew's course on. I think he has one on Central American archaeology, and I never took that one, unfortunately.
It still sounds like an amazing experience, though,
Yeah, yeah.
down there visiting that museum. So we've touched a bit on how archaeology has played a role later in your life, skills you've developed and still use today that you kind of started honing and worked on while in the archaeology program. Do you have any recommendations for current or prospective students, whether maybe people just coming in out of high school or maybe people who are coming back to school later in life in a non-traditional way?
Um, yeah, I think I guess my recommendations for folks who are would be interested in going to the archaeology program at UWL. Um, Definitely get involved with MVAC for sure. That's a big one, right? Whether you're just like doing student research or whether you're trying to get like a summer internship or even working there after you graduate, if they've got a position, if they've got an opportunity for you, like for sure apply for that. Um, I think that hands-on experience that's available in the program is excellent. So definitely take any opportunity that you can for any of those hands-on experiences. Um, don't be afraid to express interest in things. So work with your professors, make use of their office hours, spend as much time with them as you can, trying to see what maybe interests you, what skill sets you want to develop within archaeology, right? So I think much like in any other industry, having like a specialty within archaeology is going to be really important for you, especially if you want to pursue archaeology as a career path. So I think that's really important too. Yeah, uh, I guess if you have the interest, I would really recommend it. I think it's a great program. So, and La Crosse is beautiful too. So if you're coming from a different part of the state or a different part of the country, um, it's La Crosse is a beautiful town. There's lots going on there. The access to nature is incredible. And yeah, also low cost of living that's a big plus too.
Yeah, definitely is a great place to live. And anybody who is interested in learning more about the program or about MVAC, we here at MVAC are usually open normal business hours Monday through Friday. So even if you're in La Crosse, just kind of happen to stop by, you can see if someone's here and see if it's
Yeah, the museums.
something you're interested in addition to being able to plan out visits and all those sorts of things officially with UWL.
Yeah.
So
The museum's always open too. So if you're just a member of the public, you're not going to school anytime soon, but you're interested, the museum at MVAC is definitely worth checking out.
Well, thanks so much, Max, for joining us today.
Yeah.
Really appreciated the stories and perspectives that you shared with us. It was great to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for putting together this alumni series. I can't wait to see who you guys are going to have on in the future. It'll be fun to hear from more folks, either that I may know or maybe other folks that I didn't have a chance to meet when I was in the program. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you again for being on, and thank you everyone for listening and taking in our episode today. If you want to find out more about MVAC, you can visit our website at uwlax.edu/MVAC. And hopefully you can check out some web pages and other resources on archaeological topics in the upper Midwest there. We'd be happy to have you.